Panentheism, or more accurately, in this case, symbiotic panentheism, is the only understanding of reality rationally capable of resolving the debate regarding the validity of monism, the existence of only physical existence, or dualism, the simultaneous existence of the physical aspect of the individual, and the spiritual existence of the individual, without reducing to an either-or. The concept here in solving the debate would be a perspective of non-dualist, symbiotic panentheism. Now, continuing our narration of the tract, Volume 15, Panentheism, addressing monism and dualism. The monist is wrong, but the monist is right. The monist expends their energy in the effort to preserve their position, in the effort of self-preservation, in what Darwin would term survival of the fittest. As such, the monist works feverishly to validate self-supporting concepts and repudiate concepts which undermine monistic positions. Thus, the debates emerge regarding the either-or position, the monistic dualistic debate. With the advent of the new metaphysical system of non-Cartesian open system being powered by a Cartesian closed system, the individual acting within God, the monists appear to have had the concept regarding a whole intuitively correct. The monist debated incorrectly regarding the singularity of the whole metaphysical picture. The whole appears to be abstractual in nature, and as such, the physical becomes what is innate rather than the whole being physical and the abstractual being innate. The dualist is right, but the dualist is wrong. The dualist expends their energy in the effort to preserve their position, in the effort of self-preservation, in what Darwin would term survival of the fittest. As such, the dualist works feverishly to validate self-supporting concepts and repudiate concepts which undermine dualistic positions. Thus, the debates emerge regarding the either-or position of monism and dualism. The whole and its parts exist in a symbiotic relationship of expanding knowledge. The result, the permanent existence of a dualistic relationship of the whole to its parts and the parts to the whole. The relationship existing between the abstract or spirit and the physical maintains a dualistic form only as long as the physical can sustain itself. Once the physical dissipates, the relationship only exists as an abstractual existence between, once again, the singularity of the abstractual whole and the multiplicity of its abstractual parts. As such, with the advent of the new metaphysical system of the non-Cartesian open system being powered by a Cartesian closed system, the individual acting within God, the dualists appear to have had it intuitively correct. The dualists had it incorrect in terms of which aspects of the system were dualistic in nature. The dualism exists not in the form of the abstract and the physical, but rather the dualism exists in the form, the existence of the singularity and multiplicity. The error of contemporary perception emerged from the incomplete view the dualists had regarding the total metaphysical picture. It is not the whole of the abstract which exists within the physical, as perceived by contemporary dualists, but rather the whole of the physical appears to exist within the whole of the abstract, or spirit, or what religions call God. Examination of contemporary thought. In the section, the monist is wrong, but the monist is right, the primal action of the monist was stipulated as: the monist expends their energy in the effort to preserve their position, in the effort of self-preservation, and what Darwin would term survival of the fittest. As such, the monist works feverishly to validate self-supporting concepts and repudiate concepts which undermine its position. Thus, the debates emerge regarding the either-or positions raging between the monist and the dualist. In the section, the dualist is right, but the dualist is wrong, the primal action of the dualist was stipulated as: the dualist expands their energy in the effort to preserve their position, in the effort of self-preservation, in what Darwin would term survival of the fittest. As such, the dualist works feverishly to validate self-supporting concepts and repudiate concepts which undermine its position. Thus, the debates emerge regarding the either-or positions raging between the dualist and the monist. With the advent of the new metaphysical model regarding an open non-Cartesian system powered by a closed Cartesian system located within the open non-Cartesian, the individual acting within God, primal action turns from one of self-preservation of one as opposed to the other to primal action of both oneself and others. Within the new metaphysical system, the physical concept of oneself and others as opposed to either or moves philosophically to being one's ideas and the ideas of others as opposed to the choice of either this idea or that idea, but not both. As such, all contemporary philosophical positions become not only viable but critical from the point of view of the new metaphysical perception. Thus turns the debate regarding which is correct into the debate being how it is that both positions are correct. So there is a relatively brief demonstration regarding the philosophical validation regarding the pluralistic characteristic of the new metaphysical perception as opposed to the exclusionary either-or philosophical approach of the two existing metaphysical models of the Aristotelian Cartesianism and the Kant-Hegelian non-Cartesianism. The new approach would proceed as follows. Due to limited space, the vast array of complex topics mentioned cannot possibly be explored in detail. The examination regarding the vast array of complex topics and the impact of the new metaphysical perception has upon such topics of debate will need to be restricted by 1, using its extreme reductionism in the discussion, 2, using a selective choice of concepts. Reductive materialism, from the perspective of contemporary philosophy. Reductive materialism asserts that mental states are physical states of the brain. From the perspective of the new metaphysical perception, the mental state may be a physical state of the brain, but awareness of such states of awareness, that is, consciousness of one's consciousness, is not a state of the physical. Eliminative materialism, from the perspective of contemporary philosophy. Eliminative materialism is thus trying to do the impossible, to reduce nothing to something. From the perspective of the new metaphysical perception, the perception that the eliminative materialist is attempting to reduce nothing to something is a misperception, be it on the part of the one analyzing the eliminative materialist or the eliminative materialists themselves. Eliminative materialism is a viable concept if one attempts to reduce something to nothing and then begins to understand how, through reversing the process, nothing through symmetry evolves into something. Something, everything, can thus logically be reduced to nothing. And from nothing, something, everything, can emerge. The concept of everything being reduced to nothing implies a purity of nihilism from the viewpoint of the monist. However, from the point of a third and new metaphysical model, vying to replace Kant-Hegelian non-Cartesianism and Aristotelian Cartesianism, that is, the reduction of everything to nothing, leaves what is not a thing, but rather leaves the non-material, leaves the non-physical intact, leaves knowing, and knowing intact, leaves the individual, God, and action intact in the form of the individual acting within God, hence Panentheism, as well as in the form of God acting within the individual, the two states which exist in both the active form as well as the passive form, or what could be considered the unconscious and conscious form. So whether an awareness of one acting within God exists or not, it nonetheless does in passive form. Functionalism. From the perspective of contemporary philosophy, functionalism, what do two neuropsychological states have in common if they are both the same mental state? His answer, Putnam was that they serve the same function in a human organism. But from the perspective of the new metaphysical perception, these are two forms of consciousness, awareness. There is the consciousness of sensory data, and there is the consciousness of one's consciousness. A computer may be developed which becomes aware of its actions, consciousness of action, intentionality, may be innately characteristic of complex nuclear, atomic, and molecular functions, but being fully aware of just what that means is another question altogether. If one builds a machine capable of conscious action, it may be in fact advanced to the next level. That is, the machine may eventually become accessible to the purity of abstractual understanding of just what the machine's intentions are. As such, man could conceivably create a mechanism capable of acting as a conduit for virgin consciousness development. In essence, abstraction becomes bridged with the physical. Awareness, thus, would find itself capable of receiving information from the physical through a form of synaptic connection, where the two never truly touch in the normal sense of physical touch. Such a connection is not a foreign concept to the physical, for within the realm of the physical itself, nothing actually touches, but rather proximity of location becomes registered through other means. Sense data theory, from the perspective of contemporary philosophy, the issue arises primarily from various forms of realism that hold that the world contains mind-independent entities. The question is whether visual access to them is mediate or immediate. That is, whether it is conditioned by the intervention of mental entities or even by certain physical factors. From the perspective of the new metaphysical perception, the concept of mediate or immediate becomes a concept of mediate, immediate, and identifiable. As such, the concept becomes immediate between body and brain, mediate between brain and consciousness, and identifiable between consciousness and consciousness of consciousness. Nihilism, from the perspective of contemporary philosophy, nihilism, everything that exists, the soul, God, other minds, and external objects, are dissolved into nothingness. From the perception of the new metaphysical perception, everything that exists may well be reducible to nothingness, but nothingness itself exists not as the totality, but rather exists as a part of the whole. God, singularity, and the individuality, the soul, God and the individual exist as abstractual forms and not a thing. I would use and apply the word energy here, perhaps, or fields, actions rather than substances. Thus, the individual and God may be be within everything, but God and the individual are not a part of the summation of everything. The result, everything, may be reducible to nothingness, but God and the individual, not being things or substances, would remain as they are, abstractions outside the fabric of time and space. Hermeneutics, from the perspective of contemporary philosophy. Hermeneutics effectively breaks with the main concerns and problems of modern philosophy, in particular with those having to do with attempts to explain how an isolated, wordless subject can ever break out of itself so as to achieve knowledge of the external world. All of this could be summed up by saying that under philosophical hermeneutics, to understand is to interpret, and to interpret is to transform. From the perspective of the new metaphysical perception, the wordless subject exists in a parallel form with the external world. Both exist. The wordless subject as a form of active existence, and the external world as a form of a passive existence. The passive exists as a function of time, as long as time exists. The active exists functionless of time, independent of time, but formed by the limits of time itself. In summary, the abstract, God, spirit, the transcendent, the active, evolves from the virgin to being what it is through interpretation of the physical. The passive. Existentialism. From the perspective of contemporary philosophy, significantly, it is our embodied consciousness that affords as this evidence. Sator never was a non-body dualist, even though he sharply distinguished between being for itself, roughly consciousness, and being in itself, or the non-conscious. The contrast is not between substances, only being in itself is substantial, but between two manners or functions of being. Sator's basic dualism is one of the spontaneity and inertia. It occurs at every stage of his thought. From the perspective of the new metaphysical perception, dualism is dualism. Multiplicity of being in itself is no less dualism than Zeno's acknowledgement of multiplicity and seamlessness. If, however, dualism recognizes the whole for what it is, the whole, then whether the whole is a form of singularity or a form of multiplicity composing singularity of God as the summation of the individual becomes a form of monistic entity composed of infinite elements of beings, plural. The net result is the incorporation of monism as the product of dualism. Continental theistic philosophers, from the perspective of contemporary philosophy. During the 20th century, many philosophers offered modern ways of conceiving of our knowledge and understanding of God and our relation to the divine. From the perspective of the new metaphysical perception, the sub-element, knowing, is a part of the whole of knowing. The sub-element, the individual, or you could say soul, is a part of the whole of God. In addition to no part exists without purpose, in the case of the sub-elements of knowing and the sub-elements of existence, the function of knowing and existence is to make the whole of knowing, the whole of God, what it is, the whole of knowing, the whole of God, or causative force, or source, or spirit, the transcendent. As such, knowing God and sub-elements of knowing, the individual, take on both the active and passive states of the verb being. Feminist philosophy. From the perspective of contemporary philosophy, subjects exercise this freedom through a confrontational imposition of meaning upon themselves and their situations, a process which other persons become one's object or other. Such objects acquire meaning not through their own power, but only in relation to the subject who observes them. And I would say, that said, in many ways, Alfred North Whitehead's metaphysical model also is similar in many ways to this. That is why I say, in many ways, process theology / philosophy is in agreement with symbiotic panentheism. Because a subject is the author of the situation, she or he must claim entire and unmitigated responsibility for it. It is, however, possible to reject this responsibility. To do so is to live in bad faith. Knowing one's freedom and responsibility, yet refusing it in favor of being reduced to an other for other subjects. From the perspective of the new metaphysical perception, feminist philosophy attempts to elevate we, the deemed interior, to the status of they, we, they, dualism. Feminist philosophy will never get women and others deemed inferior where they want to go, for feminist philosophy starts from the perception of perceived inferiority and attempts to move the position of perceived inferiority to the level of equality. The result? The goal is therefore to get women and others deemed inferior there. There being where others perceive them not to be. In addition, feminist philosophy begins in the realm of the physical and attempts to build physical equality first, and then develops abstractual equality. The only thing that will work to shift women and others deemed inferior to the there location is to initiate an entirely new metaphysical perception, initiate an entire new point of perception which launches women and others deemed inferior from the there location at the outset. Such is the result of the new metaphysical perception of the individual acting within God. In addition, The new metaphysical perception initiates the process regarding the understanding of equality in the realm of the abstract, and then develops the rationale for the physical equality arguments. Analytical philosophy. From the perspective of contemporary philosophy, if there is a single feature that characterizes analytical philosophy, it is probably its emphasis on trying to articulate clearly the meaning of concepts such as knowledge, truth, and justification. This project is guided by the assumption that proposed thesis cannot be assessed judiciously until it and its constituent concepts are understood plainly. From the perspective of the new metaphysical perception, the articulation regarding the meaning of concepts such as knowledge, truth, and justification remains in a state of confusion due to the inability of philosophy itself to develop a consensus regarding the resolution to the eternal debate regarding the legitimacy of monism versus dualism.